The Redwood County Jail towered over the small town like a monolithic reminder of the inevitability of justice. The gray walls, topped with barbed wire, cast long shadows on the pavement, even at noon when the sun was at its zenith. For most Redwood residents, the jail was not only a symbol of the law, but also a major source of employment. Many families existed on the wages brought home by the guards, administrators, and maintenance staff. Michael Dawson had been in charge for 8 years. A tall man with a military bearing and a perfectly shaven face, he had turned Redwood Prison into a model institution with a record low incident rate. Dawson came from a military family. His father and grandfather had served in the Army, and although he chose a different path, military discipline was part of his character. He believed in clear order, schedules, and hierarchy. Every morning, Michael woke up at 5 a.m. sharp, jogged 5 kilometers, showered for exactly 7 minutes, and ate breakfast while reading the night's incident reports. At the prison, Dawson established a regime that many called draconian. Prisoners lived on a strict schedule, rising at 6 in the morning, leaving at 10 in the evening, 3 meals, 2 hours for a walk in a designated yard, and limited time to visit the library or gym depending on behavior. Any violation of the rules was immediately punishable by revocation of privileges or solitary confinement. But there was more. Michael truly believed in the possibility of correction. He personally developed several educational programs for inmates, believing that education was the key to preventing recidivism. Prison should not break people, he often said at staff meetings. Our job is to redirect their energy in a constructive direction. During his 8 years in charge, the number of fights between inmates dropped by 30%, and the number of inmates who received education or job training doubled. To many in Redwood City, Dawson was a hero for making their city safer. But few knew the cost of these accomplishments to his personal life. Michael Dawson lived his job. He spent 12 to 14 hours in jail each day, skipped family dinners, and rarely showed up at town events unless they were directly related to his professional duties. His wife Elizabeth was often alone in their spacious home on the outskirts of town. It was a beautiful 2-story colonial-style mansion with a manicured garden, the result of Michael's years of work and constant promotions. To many, their marriage seemed ideal. A successful husband, providing for his family, and a beautiful, elegant wife, engaged in philanthropy. Elizabeth Dawson, maiden name Willis, was the daughter of a respected literature professor from Boston. She received an excellent education, studied art history, and dreamed of working in a museum or gallery. 38 years old, a slim figure that she maintained with regular yoga classes, and brown hair that she styled into a flawless updo before every outing, Elizabeth was the epitome of elegance. She met Michael at a charity event in Boston. He was then an ambitious young prison officer, and she was a graduate student moonlighting as a cultural event organizer. Their affair was swift and passionate. They married 6 months later, and Elizabeth moved to a small town, giving up her ambitions for love. The first years she was happy, engaged in organizing their home and supporting her husband. But gradually, the passion faded, turning into a routine, and Michael devoted more and more time to work. Elizabeth felt like a bird in a golden cage. She had everything a woman of her position could dream of: a beautiful house, financial stability, respect in society. But she was suffocating from loneliness and unrealized desires. There were no museums or art galleries in Redwood City, and the local community consisted mostly of the wives of prison officers and other municipal workers with whom she had little in common. To fill the void, Elizabeth took up philanthropy. She organized a fund to support the families of prisoners and regularly held educational events at the prison. Michael supported her initiatives, seeing them as a continuation of his mission to rehabilitate criminals. For Elizabeth, these activities were the only way to break out of the routine and feel needed. It was at one of these events that she first met Ray McCoy. Raymond Ray McCoy was serving a 5-year sentence for securities fraud. Before his arrest, he had been a successful Wall Street broker living the high life 35 years old. Athletic build, reddish hair, and green eyes that always read mockery made him noticeable even in a prison uniform. Ray had a rare gift of persuasion and the ability to find an approach to any person. These qualities made him a millionaire, but eventually led him to jail when he crossed the line and began to manipulate data to support his lavish lifestyle. In Redwood Prison, Ray adapted quickly and found his niche. His intelligence and communication skills earned him a job in the prison library, a privileged position that gave him relative freedom of movement and access to information. The other inmates respected him not for his physical strength, but for his ability to solve problems and find loopholes in the system. Ray did not seek escape or open conflict with the administration. Instead, he created his own system within the prison hierarchy. He helped draft appeals, wrote letters to other inmates' families, and gave behavioral advice at parole hearings. In exchange, he received protection from more violent inmates and minor privileges that made life behind bars more bearable. Even the guards treated him with a certain respect, though they kept their distance. Ray was polite, never openly broke a rule, and often helped calm tense situations between inmates. The only person who saw him as a threat was Warden Michael Dawson. He didn't trust charismatic criminals and believed that people like McCoy were especially dangerous because of their ability to manipulate. That fall, Elizabeth organized a series of art lectures at the prison for inmates who wanted to develop their creative abilities. She had always believed in the power of art as a means of self-expression and healing. Michael was skeptical of the initiative, but did not object, seeing his wife's enthusiasm. The first lecture was attended by about 15 inmates, mostly those who were looking for any opportunity to diversify the prison routine. Elizabeth talked about the great artists of the Renaissance, showing reproductions on a projector. Most of the audience looked bored, but one man sat on the front row and asked questions that showed his knowledge of the subject. It was Ray McCoy. After the lecture, as the guards were beginning to lead the prisoners out, Ray lingered. "Mrs. Dawson, let me thank you for a fascinating lecture," he said with a slight smile. "It was particularly interesting to hear your analysis of light and shade in Caravaggio." Elizabeth was surprised. It was rare that anyone in Redwood could hold a conversation about art on such a level. "Are you interested in art, mister?" she asked. "McCoy. Ray McCoy. And yes, in another life I collected modern paintings. Nothing outstanding, but I've always appreciated beauty." The guard interrupted their conversation, reminding them that time was up. But this brief conversation was enough to pique Elizabeth's interest. In the weeks that followed, she looked forward to her visits to the prison, knowing that Ray would be at her lectures. Their conversations grew longer and more frank. Ray had a knack for listening and asking the right questions, showing interest in her thoughts and feelings, something she hadn't gotten from her husband in years. He talked about his past life, his travels, and the art he had seen in museums around the world, and Elizabeth felt she had found a kindred spirit in the most unexpected place. One day, after a particularly emotional lecture on romanticism, Ray handed her a folded piece of paper along with a book he was supposedly returning. The piece of paper had just a few words written on it. "You deserve more. You deserve passion." Elizabeth knew she should throw the note away and stop these dangerous games. But instead, she tucked the sheet into her pocket, and that night she reread it over and over as she lay next to her sleeping husband. Michael didn't notice her inner struggle, immersed in his work problems and reports. At the next lecture, she brought in a book on art history for the prison library. Inside was her response, "Passion is dangerous, but sometimes we choose danger." Thus began their secret affair, through notes hidden in books and brief moments alone under the pretense of discussing art. Elizabeth knew she was risking everything: her marriage, her reputation, perhaps even her freedom. But for the first time in years, she felt alive. Ray was careful and calculating. He never crossed the line in the presence of guards, and always maintained the appearance of a formal relationship. But in his notes, he revealed a different side: passionate, romantic, eager for intimacy. Elizabeth knew that these words could be as manipulative as the ones that had led him to prison, but she wanted to believe in their sincerity, needed that faith. Their first physical contact took place in a back room next to the library. Elizabeth was helping to lay out books for her seminar, and Ray offered his help. They were alone for only a few minutes, but it was enough. Their hands touched over a stack of books, and the next moment they were kissing, desperately and greedily, as if it were their last chance for happiness. After that, their meetings became more frequent and riskier. Elizabeth used her status as the warden's wife to gain access to different parts of the prison, and Ray knew the guards' shift schedules and the blind spots of the security cameras. Sometimes they had only a few minutes. Sometimes they had nearly an hour in an empty classroom or storage room. But prison is a place where secrets don't last long. People began to notice changes in Elizabeth's behavior. She began to visit the prison more often, seemed more lively, paid more attention to her appearance. The guards saw her expression change when she met McCoy, even though she tried to hide it. The first to realize what was happening was Dr. James Foster, the prison doctor, 47 years old, with prematurely graying hair and tired eyes behind round glasses. He had been working in the prison system for 15 years. Foster was a quiet man who preferred to observe rather than talk. He saw all kinds of stories in his office: beaten prisoners, guards with nervous breakdowns, simians, and those who really needed help. James knew the medical history of every inmate, including Ray McCoy. And what he knew made him worry about the growing intimacy between McCoy and the warden's wife. 6 months ago, during a routine medical checkup, McCoy was diagnosed with HIV. The inmate reacted to the news with remarkable calm, almost fatalism. "Life is full of irony, Doc," he said at the time. "I thought I'd lost my freedom when I got here, but the real sentence you've just read." Dr. Foster explained to him the treatment protocol and the confidentiality of the diagnosis. By law, prison officials were informed of the prisoner's medical condition, but the details remained a medical secret. McCoy received the necessary medication to control the progression of the disease, and his condition was stable. Foster watched the relationship between Elizabeth and Ray develop, first with curiosity, then with growing concern. He saw them exchange glances in the dining room, their hands accidentally touching as they passed books. The doctor tried to warn McCoy of the risks and responsibilities, but he only smiled his trademark smile and said the doctor had it all wrong. "Mrs. Dawson is a fine woman who does good things for the inmates. I'm just being respectful," he said. But there was something in his eyes that made Foster not believe those words. James was facing an ethical dilemma. On the one hand, he was bound by doctor-patient confidentiality and could not reveal McCoy's diagnosis. On the other, he saw the potential danger to Elizabeth and indirectly to the warden, whom he respected despite his rigidity. Foster decided to talk to Elizabeth. He invited her into his office on the pretext of discussing a new psychological support program for inmates. "Mrs. Dawson, I admire your work here," he began gently, "but I must warn you of the possible risks of too much contact with the prisoners." Elizabeth tensed, but kept her composure. "What exactly are you talking about, Dr. Foster?" "Some prisoners may use your kindness for their own ends. Manipulators are especially dangerous because they are skilled at creating the illusion of sincerity. If you're referring to Mr. McCoy, I'm well aware of who he is and what he's serving time for. But I also believe in people's capacity for change and redemption." Foster realized he couldn't say directly what he wanted to say. Instead, he added, "Just be careful. Not everything here is what it seems." But it was too late. Elizabeth was too deeply involved with Ray to stop because of vague warnings. The secret affair continued, becoming increasingly risky and passionate. There were whispers in the corridors of the prison about the special treatment of the warden's wife for the library inmate. Some guards were betting on when Dawson would learn the truth and what he would do to McCoy. But for now, the warden remained in the dark, completely absorbed in administrative problems and preparations for the annual inspection of the institution. Dr. Foster continued to watch, feeling that the ticking bomb was about to go off and the consequences would be disastrous for all parties involved. Elizabeth Dawson sat in the clinic's waiting room, nervously tapping her fingers on the leather handle of her bag. The clinic was in a neighboring town, an hour's drive from Redwood City. She always tried to keep her routine checkups far away from home to avoid unnecessary gossip and prying eyes. The warden's wife was always under the scrutiny of the locals, and any move she made became a topic of discussion. Elizabeth had been feeling unusually weak for the past few weeks, and woke up in a sweat from time to time. She wrote it off as stress and emotional strain from her secret relationship with Ray. But when a persistent sore throat and enlarged lymph nodes joined the symptoms, she decided not to take any chances and made an appointment. "Mrs. Dawson?" There was a nurse standing in the doorway with a file in her hand. "Dr. Henderson is ready for you." The doctor's office was sterilely clean, with a minimum of decor: a diploma on the wall, a few medical models on a shelf, and a picture of the family on the desk. Dr. Henderson, an older man with a neat gray beard, was carefully studying the results of her tests. "Have a seat, Mrs. Dawson." He pointed to a chair across the table. "How are you feeling today?" "A little better, but I'm still a little weak," Elizabeth answered, settling into the chair. "It's just a lingering cold, isn't it?" Dr. Henderson took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, a gesture that immediately alerted Elizabeth. In her 20 years of practice, she had learned to recognize the moment when a doctor was about to deliver unpleasant news. "Mrs. Dawson, there are some abnormalities in your tests that have me concerned." He put his glasses back on and looked her straight in the eye. "We've done additional blood tests, and the results show the presence of HIV antibodies." The doctor's words sounded distant, as if through a column of water. Elizabeth felt the room begin to spin. This is impossible," she whispered. "There must be some mistake." "I understand your shock, Mrs. Dawson. We ran a second test to confirm, and the result was the same. I would recommend that you start antiretroviral therapy immediately. With modern treatment, people with HIV can lead fulfilling lives." Elizabeth sat motionless, unable to comprehend what she had heard, the only person she had been close to in recent years, besides her husband. How could this have happened? Her voice was shaking. "HIV is transmitted through blood, seminal fluid, vaginal secretion, and breast milk," the doctor methodically began to explain. "The most common routes of transmission are unprotected sexual contact and—" "I know the routes of transmission," Elizabeth interrupted him sharply. "I mean, my husband is healthy." Dr. Henderson looked at her sympathetically. "Mrs. Dawson, I recommend that your husband be tested as well, and if there have been any other contacts, they should be notified as well." Elizabeth remembered the rest of the conversation vaguely. The doctor said something about specialists, about modern treatment methods, about confidentiality. She nodded, mechanically picking up prescriptions and information brochures, but her mind was far away. The realization of betrayal burned stronger from within than the fear of the diagnosis. 3 days later, Elizabeth sat in Dr. Foster's office at Redwood Prison. She had asked for the meeting, calling it a discussion about the new rehabilitation program, but the real reason was different. She had to know. Dr. Foster seemed nervous. He kept adjusting his glasses and shifting papers on his desk, signs Elizabeth had learned to notice during her years of charity work at the prison. "Dr. Foster, I appreciate your privacy, but my life is at stake right now." Her voice was quiet but determined. "I just tested positive for HIV, and I need to know if you knew about Ray McCoy's status." Foster turned pale. His inner struggle was reflected on his face, professional ethics versus human empathy. "Mrs. Dawson, you realize you're asking me to violate doctor-patient confidentiality," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully. "I can't comment on the health of specific prisoners." Elizabeth leaned across the table. "James," she called him by name for the first time, "you tried to warn me earlier, didn't you? Is this what you were implying? Please, I must know the truth." There was a long pause. Foster took a deep breath. "I can't confirm and I won't deny it," he said at last. "But I would advise you to speak to Mr. McCoy himself. And Elizabeth, you must inform your husband." The words were a confirmation of her worst fears. She stood up, feeling both numb and angry. "Thank you for your advice, Dr. Foster." Her voice sounded detached. "I'll do just that." She had arranged the meeting with Ray through the one-on-one art counseling program she had set up months ago. They met in a small study room next to the library. Usually, these meetings ended with hugs and kisses in a far corner, hidden from security cameras. But not today. Ray walked in with his usual cocky smile that used to make her heart beat faster. Now she saw only cruel irony in that smile. "You knew," she said without preamble as soon as the door closed. "You knew about your diagnosis and you didn't tell me anything." Ray's smile didn't waver, but his eyes betrayed surprise for a second. "What are you talking about, Elizabeth?" He tried to take her hand, but she yanked it away. "Don't you dare lie to me!" Her voice shook with rage. "I tested positive for HIV. The only way I could have gotten infected is through you." And Dr. Foster actually confirmed that you knew your status. Ray stared at her for a few seconds, then slowly lowered himself into a chair. His posture had changed. The usual contrived confidence was gone. His shoulders slumped slightly. "I should have told you," he said at last. "But I was afraid of losing you. You were the only light in this hell. So you decided to take me with you?" Elizabeth struggled to hold back her tears. "You knew you were putting me at risk, and still—" "We had protection, almost always," Ray interrupted her. "The risk was minimal." "Minimal?" Her voice trailed off into a scream. "You gambled with my life. I trusted you. And what would have changed if you had known?" A cold glint appeared in his eyes. "Would you not have wanted to be with me? Or would we have just been more careful? I'm on medication. My virus is almost undetectable in my blood." "It's not about that, and you know it." She shook her head. "It's about choice. You took away my choice." In the silence that followed, Elizabeth realized the depth of her situation. Not only was she infected, but she would have to explain it to her husband. She would have to confess the betrayal that now left an indelible mark in her blood. "What are you going to do?" Ray asked, watching her face. "I have to tell Michael. And tell him everything? About us?" Ray stepped forward. "Do you realize what he'll do to me?" Elizabeth didn't answer. She didn't care what would happen to Ray, but she knew the truth would ruin not only her marriage, but also Michael's career. A scandal with the warden's wife having an intimate relationship with an inmate could destroy everything he'd spent years building. "There's another way out," Ray said quietly. "You don't tell him anything. You continue the treatment in secret. You use protection with your husband, and he'll never know." "And our relationship?" Elizabeth grinned bitterly. "Do you think I'll want to continue them after this?" Ray's face changed, becoming harder. "I think you should think about it, Elizabeth. If you decide to end our relationship and tell your husband the truth, I won't keep quiet. I'll tell everyone how the warden's wife seduced a poor prisoner." "Are you threatening me?" She couldn't believe her ears. "I'm just pointing out the facts," he shrugged. "Who will be believed? Me, a prisoner with a history of fraud, or you, the warden's respectable wife? You, of course, but the scandal will be huge, and your husband's career will be ruined. Is that what you want?" Elizabeth felt the blood drain from her face. Ray, whom she thought was her salvation from loneliness, her soulmate, had turned into a monster right before her eyes. The days that followed passed like a blur. Elizabeth walked around the house, mechanically performing the usual activities, cooking dinner, gardening, doing everything she could to maintain a semblance of normalcy. But inside her, a storm was raging. Every night she lay next to her husband, thinking about how one mistake had ruined everything. Michael, despite his preoccupation with work, began to notice a change. Elizabeth became aloof, avoided physical intimacy, and often locked herself in the bathroom with her phone. One evening, he found in the trash can a package of medication he was unfamiliar with. "Are you sick?" he asked at dinner. "I found some pills." Elizabeth almost dropped her fork. "They're vitamins," she lied. "The doctor prescribed them to boost her immune system." Michael stared at her. "Elizabeth, what's going on? You can tell me." For a moment, she almost made up her mind. To tell everything, to accept the consequences, but then she remembered Ray's threat, and her loyalty to Michael, despite the betrayal, had kept her from ruining his career. "It's okay," she forced out a smile. "Just tired lately. Too many charity projects." Michael didn't look convinced, but he didn't insist. Instead, he said, "I've noticed that you've been in prison less often. Does your art program no longer interest you?" Elizabeth felt her heart start to beat faster. "No, it's just that, there were a lot of other things going on. I thought I'd take a break." "That's strange," Michael said thoughtfully, "because the paperwork says you're still doing regular one-on-one counseling with inmate McCoy. Guard Jenkins mentioned it." There was a heavy pause. Elizabeth realized that her husband suspected something, but didn't know how deep his suspicions went. "He's a talented artist." Her voice sounded unnaturally high. "I think he has potential." "I know McCoy," Michael set his fork aside. "He's a manipulator and a liar. Be careful with him." Elizabeth nodded silently, feeling the walls of their home begin to press down on her. The next visit to the prison was torture. She wasn't there to see Ray, she was there for an official meeting with a group of inmates in a rehabilitation program. But she knew he would be there. And he was, sitting in the back row, watching her with the same confident smile. When the meeting was over, he passed her a note through another inmate. Today, laundry room, 8 p.m. important. Elizabeth tore the note into small pieces. She wasn't going to go, didn't want to see him again. But what if he decided to carry out his threat? What if he talked? At 7:30, she called Michael, told him the volunteer meeting was dragging on and she'd be back late. Then drove to the prison. She still had the enhanced access pass Michael had given her for charity projects. The guards at the entrance knew her and only nodded politely, asking no questions. The prison laundry was usually empty in the evening. The main work was done during the day, and in the evening there was only one prisoner on duty to keep order. Elizabeth knew Ray had to be there tonight. He had arranged it himself using his connections inside the prison. The room was filled with the smell of laundry detergent and wet laundry. Huge industrial machines stood silent. Only a dim light burned in the far side of the laundry room. "I knew you'd come." Ray's voice came from the back of the room. "You always come." He stepped out of the shadows, no longer in his prison uniform, but in the work overalls of the laundry room. Elizabeth kept her distance. "What do you want, Ray? I'm not playing this game anymore." "It's not a game." He moved closer to her. "This is our life, and your husband suspects something." He questioned the guards, checked the security tapes. Elizabeth felt a chill run down her spine. "How do you know?" "I have eyes and ears everywhere," he grinned. "We need to be more careful. Maybe we should stop meeting for a while." "There won't be any meetings, Ray. It's over." "No, it's not over." His voice became harder. "Not for me. Not for you either. If you want your husband to keep his precious reputation. You can't blackmail me forever." Elizabeth could feel the anger building up inside. Sooner or later it would end. Ray took another step toward her. "Of course it will. When I get out of here. In the meantime, you'll do as I say." At that moment, a noise was heard at the far end of the laundry room. Someone else was in here. Ray turned around sharply, his face contorted with tension. "Who's there?" he shouted. A figure appeared from behind a stack of clean laundry. In the dim light, Elizabeth didn't immediately recognize the man, but then realized it was Dr. Foster. "Dr. Foster, what are you doing here?" she asked, feeling both fear and relief at the presence of a witness. Foster looked alarmed. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his glasses. I heard your conversation," he said, "and I can't keep quiet any longer. What you're doing, McCoy, is a crime. You have deliberately endangered Mrs. Dawson's health, and now you're blackmailing her." Ray turned slowly toward the doctor, his face contorted with anger. "And you violated doctor-patient confidentiality, doctor. That's a crime too. What do you think the medical board will do when they find out?" "I'm prepared to be held accountable," Foster said firmly. "Are you?" The tension in the room had reached a breaking point. Elizabeth looked at one man and another, realizing that the situation was out of control. She had to do something to stop this conflict. What happened next happened as if in slow motion. A blow, a scream, the sound of a falling body, blood on the white tiles of the floor, silence, broken only by heavy breathing. Elizabeth froze in horror, unable to believe what had just happened before her eyes. Dr. Foster's body lay motionless on the floor, with a bloody metal bar lying nearby. Ray slowly turned to her, his eyes as blank as a doll's. "Now we both have a secret to keep," he said quietly. "You won't be able to leave me anymore." The morning at Redwood Prison began with the howling of sirens. A guard coming to check on the laundry room found Dr. Foster's body in a pool of dried blood. The news spread lightning fast through the corridors, becoming a whisper behind every bar. Murder in prison is always an emergency, but the murder of a prison doctor raised the alarm to a whole new level. Michael Dawson arrived on the scene 20 minutes after the incident was reported. His face was pale, his lips pressed into a thin line. He examined the body without uttering a word, then gave short orders to lock down the jail and call in an investigation team from the county office. A hurricane raged inside him. The murder had happened on his property, in a jail that was considered one of the most secure in the state. "No one goes in or out," he instructed the senior guard. "Total lockdown until investigators arrive." By noon, Detective Sarah Clark, the county's senior investigator, arrived at the jail, 37 years old, a slender woman with short dark hair and attentive gray eyes that seemed to notice everything. Dawson met her at the main entrance, led her through the security checkpoints, and escorted her to the laundry room where forensics was already working on collecting evidence. "Victim, Dr. James Foster, 47, prison doctor," Michael reported in a dry, official tone. "Worked here for 15 years, preliminary cause of death. Blunt force trauma to the head. Suspected murder weapon. Metal rod for turning laundry. Found near the body." Sarah nodded, scrutinizing the room. The body had already been taken away, but chalk outlines on the floor and bloodstains clearly indicated where it had been found. "Time of death?" she asked, squatting down to examine the blood spatter on the underside of the washing machine. "Sometime between 8 and 9 o'clock in the evening." Security guard Peterson discovered the body at 5:30 in the morning when he came to check the premises before the workday began. "Who had access to the laundry room at that time?" "Only the inmate on duty assigned to clean the laundry room and the guards," Michael answered. The inmate assigned there that night was McCoy, Raymond McCoy. Sarah noticed the change in Dawson's tone at the mention of that name. "Have you questioned him yet?" "Preliminary. He claims he left the laundry at 7:30 after his shift ended and never saw the body. He says he went back to his cell and stayed there until morning. Can anyone corroborate his story?" His cellmate, Jenkins, confirms that McCoy was in his cell from about 8 o'clock in the evening. But there is a 30-minute window between 7:30 and 8. Sarah wrote this information down in her notebook. "I want to talk to him, and anyone else who's had contact with Dr. Foster in the last few days." Sarah spent the next few hours reviewing security footage and questioning the guards. Unfortunately, there were no cameras in the laundry itself. The guards' union had long opposed total surveillance, arguing that it violated prisoners' rights. The cameras in the hallways showed that McCoy had indeed left the laundry at 7:35, just as he had claimed. Dr. Foster entered the laundry room at 7:50 and never came out again. No one else entered the laundry until morning, at least not through the main entrance. But there was a strange circumstance. At 8:05, the camera in the hallway leading to the laundry room went out of service for 20 minutes. The technician attributed it to a power outage, but Sarah felt it was too convenient a coincidence. While interviewing the prison staff, one of the guards, an older man named Thomas, dropped a phrase that caught Sarah's attention. "Dr. Foster seemed troubled lately," he said, "especially when it came to McCoy." "Why McCoy?" Sarah asked. The guard shrugged. "I don't know, but I once heard the doctor try to warn Mrs. Dawson to stay away from him. She often visited the prison for her charity programs." "Mrs. Dawson, the warden's wife?" Sarah clarified, sensing she was on the trail. "Yes, she taught art classes for the inmates here. McCoy was one of her, students." The guard emphasized the last word with a peculiar intonation. Another guard, Jenkins, confirmed this information, adding an interesting detail. Mrs. Dawson had spent a lot of time with McCoy in recent months. Individual counseling, they said. He hummed skeptically. "I bet the real art there wasn't on canvas." "Are you implying a personal relationship?" Sarah asked bluntly. "I'm not suggesting anything, Detective," the guard replied hastily. "I'm just making an observation. They always seemed tense around each other. Special glances, casual touches. You know what I mean?" Sarah did. And this new information put a whole new spin on the case. If there was an affair between the warden's wife and the prisoner, and Dr. Foster knew it, it could be a motive for murder. The interrogation of Ray McCoy took place in a special interrogation room. The prisoner sat with a calm, almost indifferent expression on his face. He didn't look worried or nervous, which alerted Sarah. "Mr. McCoy, tell me what happened in the laundry room last night," she began, watching his reaction carefully. "Nothing out of the ordinary." He shrugged slightly. "I finished my shift, cleaned up the room, and returned to my cell. It's business as usual." "Have you seen Dr. Foster?" "No, I left before he came in, if he came in at all." "Cameras show him entering the laundry room at 7:50. You left at 7:35. That's a 15-minute window." Are you sure you didn't cross paths with him? Ray held her gaze. I'm absolutely sure. Maybe he came in through another door or lingered in the hallway. What was your relationship with Dr. Foster? Professional, Ray answered without hesitation. He was my doctor. I was his patient. No personal contact. Sarah paused, flipping through her notes. It's interesting that other inmates describe your relationship as strained. Some say they've seen you argue with him several times in recent weeks. Ray leaned forward slightly. Detective Clark, prison is always full of rumors. People here like to make up stories to brighten up the monotony of their lives. I didn't have any conflicts with Dr. Foster. Sarah decided to move on to what she'd learned from the guards. Tell me about your relationship with Mrs. Dawson. For a split second, tension flashed across Ray's face, confirming that Sarah had hit a sensitive spot. The warden's wife? She runs the charity programs here. I was in her art program. Talented woman, very dedicated. And the guards tell a different story. Sarah stared at him intently. They talk about special consultations, special looks and touches, and about Dr. Foster warning Mrs. Dawson to stay away from you. Why do you think that was? Ray kept his expression impenetrable, but his fingers on the table tensed slightly. People see what they want to see, Detective. Guards are bored, they need entertainment. And Dr. Foster was probably just jealous. Mrs. Dawson paid a lot of attention to me as a gifted student. After an hour of questioning, Sarah had gotten nothing concrete. McCoy was too good, a master of manipulation and deception, as noted in his file. His story was impeccable, with no apparent gaps or contradictions, but Sarah's intuition told her he was hiding something, and it had to do with Elizabeth Dawson. The next step was to explore Dr. Foster's office. Sarah spent several hours there, going through medical records and personal notes. Most of the documents were standard: prisoner health reports, prescriptions, treatment schedules. But in the bottom drawer of the desk, under a stack of journals, she found the doctor's personal diary. The entries were brief, often in the form of professional notes, but some pages contained more personal observations. Sarah began reading from the last entries. Ethical dilemma with patient M is becoming unbearable. Confidentiality versus public safety. Can no longer remain silent. It was an entry dated the day of the murder. Sarah continued flipping back through the pages and found several more references to patient M, often in the context of his relationship with ED. Saw ED today, she looks exhausted. I suspect the relationship with M is ongoing. I should have been more assertive in my warnings. And finally, an entry dated 6 months earlier, diagnosed M with HIV. He took the news with remarkable calmness, started treatment protocol. Administration informed in general terms, according to protocol. Sarah closed the diary, feeling she had found an important clue. M was obviously McCoy, and ED could only be Elizabeth Dawson. Now she needed to talk to the warden's wife. In the doctor's office, she also found recent medical records sent from the city clinic. Among them was a request from Dr. Henderson for confirmation of a patient's HIV diagnosis and advice on a treatment protocol. The patient's name was scrambled, but Sarah noticed the initials, ED. The picture was beginning to take shape. If the warden's wife was having an affair with an inmate, and the inmate infected her with HIV, and Dr. Foster found out about it, that was more than a good motive for murder. Elizabeth Dawson agreed to a meeting at her house. She looked pale and tired, with dark circles under her eyes. Sarah noticed that her hands trembled slightly as she poured the tea. Mrs. Dawson, I understand that this is a difficult time for you, Sarah began gently. As far as I know, you were well acquainted with Dr. Foster. Yes, he was a good man, Elizabeth replied quietly, devoted to his work. When was the last time you saw him? Elizabeth paused for a moment. 3 days ago, at a meeting of the Prisoner Rehabilitation Committee. We were discussing a new program. Did he seem concerned about anything? Maybe talk about any problems? No, it was business as usual. Elizabeth avoided the detective's direct gaze. Dr. Foster had always been professional. Sarah decided to move on to direct questions. Mrs. Dawson, I found Dr. Foster's diary and medical records. They indicate that you and inmate Raymond McCoy had a special relationship and that you were recently diagnosed with HIV. Is that true? The cup in Elizabeth's hand shook more violently. A few drops of tea spilled onto the saucer. It's a medical mystery, she said faintly. In the context of a murder, it's an important piece of evidence, Mrs. Dawson, Sarah replied calmly. And I must remind you that obstructing an investigation is a serious offense. Elizabeth's face turned white. Please, she whispered. My husband doesn't know. It would ruin him. Sarah watched in silence as Elizabeth struggled with her emotions. Then the woman began to speak, quietly at first, then louder and louder, telling of her loneliness, of meeting Ray, of their secret relationship, about how she found out about her diagnosis, about Ray's betrayal, about his blackmail. I was at the laundromat that night, she finally admitted. Ray made an appointment for me. He threatened to tell Michael everything if I didn't continue our relationship. Dr. Foster happened to be there by chance. He overheard us talking, tried to intervene, and that's when Elizabeth couldn't finish her sentence, shuddering with sobs. Ray killed him? Sarah asked softly. Elizabeth nodded slowly, unable to utter the words. What happened then? I ran away, Elizabeth whispered. I was in shock. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Ray shouted after me that we were forever linked, that I was his accomplice. Sarah wrote down the statement and had Elizabeth sign it. She now had enough evidence to arrest McCoy on the murder charge. She promised Elizabeth to do everything she could to protect her husband's reputation, although she warned that some details would inevitably come out during the trial. Back at the prison, Sarah organized another interrogation of McCoy, this time with the presentation of new evidence. She expected a denial, perhaps an attempt to shift the blame to Elizabeth, but to her surprise, Ray just sat there listening to the accusations with a sort of detached expression on his face. Do you have anything to say, Mr. McCoy? She asked, having finished reading Elizabeth's testimony. She was always a good actress, he said quietly. Convincing. That's one of the reasons I chose her. Do you deny killing Dr. Foster? Ray looked at her for a long moment, then shook his head slightly. No, I don't deny it, but it was self-defense. He jumped me when I refused to end my relationship with Elizabeth. That contradicts Mrs. Dawson's testimony. Of course it does. Ray grinned bitterly. She's protecting herself. She always had been. Sarah sensed that something was wrong here. Her intuition, developed over years of work, told her she was missing something important. What do you mean? Ask her where she was when Guard Jenkins made his rounds at 8:15. Ask her why the camera in the laundry room hallway went out at that exact time. Sarah went back to the security footage. Indeed, the camera in the hallway leading to the laundry room stopped working at exactly 8:05. And at 8:30, when the recording resumed, there was a split-second glimpse of a figure coming out of the side corridor. A woman, tall and slender, wearing a dark coat. Elizabeth Dawson's new interrogation took place at the police station. Sarah presented her with new evidence, the camera tape, the testimony of Guard Jenkins, who had seen her leave the prison's administration building at about 8:45, although official records showed that she had left the prison at 7 o'clock. Elizabeth was silent for a long time, looking at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, but no longer trembling. I had to protect myself, protect Michael. What happened in the laundry room, Elizabeth? Sarah asked, addressing her by her first name for the first time. Ray actually set up a meeting with me. He blackmailed me, threatened to tell Michael everything. Dr. Foster did come and tried to intervene, but Ray didn't kill him. You did, Sarah said quietly, finally putting all the pieces of the puzzle together. Elizabeth nodded slowly. When Dr. Foster started threatening to reveal everything, Ray's diagnosis, our connection, I couldn't let that happen. I had a stun gun in my bag that Michael had given me for protection. I used it on the camera in the hallway, knowing where the electronic components were. Michael had once shown me. Then I went back to the laundry room. She paused, gathering her strength. James and Ray were arguing. Ray was threatening the doctor, and the doctor insisted that he had an obligation to report the situation. I grabbed a metal bar, just to scare him, to shut him up. But when he turned to me, I hit him, once. He fell, hit his head on the edge of the car. And then, Ray was shocked. He didn't expect me to do that. He offered to take the blame. He had a long sentence to serve anyway. and a few more years wouldn't make much difference. But I couldn't let him do that. It was my fault, my choice. I ran away thinking I could handle it on my own, but I couldn't. Sarah closed her notebook. Elizabeth Dawson, you're under arrest for the murder of James Foster. Elizabeth Dawson's trial became a small-town sensation. Michael Dawson resigned as warden, but stayed by his wife's side, supporting her at every hearing. Ray McCoy testified to Elizabeth's version of events, but the court found her guilty of manslaughter. Given mitigating circumstances, she received a minimum sentence of 5 years with the possibility of parole. Sarah Clark visited her in the women's prison a month after her sentencing. Elizabeth looked drained, but there was a new calm in her eyes. "I didn't expect to see you here, Detective," she said, sitting down across from Sarah at the visitors' table. "I wanted to see how you were holding up," Sarah replied. "It's part of my job to keep an eye on the outcome of cases." "I'm fine as far as I can be," Elizabeth smiled weakly. "Michael visits me every week. He's forgiven me, can you believe it? After everything I've done." "Love is sometimes stronger than circumstances," Sarah said. "And how is your health?" "I'm receiving treatment. The doctors say that with modern drugs, I can live a long life." "And McCoy?" Elizabeth's face darkened. "He was transferred to another prison after his trial. I don't know anything more about him. I don't want to know." They talked some more, and as visiting time drew to a close, Elizabeth suddenly asked a question. "Detective Clark, why do people make these choices? Why do we destroy what we should cherish for a fleeting sense of freedom?" Sarah looked at her for a long time, then answered quietly, "Maybe because sometimes a cage, even a golden one, remains a cage, and we are willing to do anything to feel free, even if that freedom is illusory." Elizabeth nodded, accepting that answer. When the guard came to take her back to her cell, she turned around and said, "You know what the ironic thing is? I still don't feel free, just changed from one cell to another." Sarah Clark stood at the gates of the women's prison for a long time, watching the sun go down. Redwood Prison was visible on the horizon, the massive gray structure where it all began. She thought about the tangled web of relationships, deceit, and fear that had led to tragedy. About the woman who sought freedom and found only a new imprisonment. About the man who manipulated everyone around him, but ultimately became a victim of circumstance himself. And about a doctor who tried to do the right thing and paid for it with his life. There were no real winners in this story, only victims of their own decisions and the consequences of the choices each of them made.